Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this countdown of the top 50 albums of the 50s as voted by you. I am, of course, joined today, as always, by my good friend John Stanek here of Johnny Radio, and we are cracking in the top 20 of this list. It's hard to believe. We're already halfway through, but many great records to be talked about on this episode, and I can't wait to get into so many classics this time around.
Oh yeah, man, the classics keep coming. And hey, last episode, man, we had a lot of
Stacked.
amazing records, especially some that you and I had only like heard for the first time in the last couple months leading up to this countdown. So it's been exciting and it continues to be. So can't wait to get right into it.
Absolutely, man. And I think part of that will repeat this episode this time around. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it at number 20.
Well, I got a woman.
Ray Charles, the debut album from 1957, produced by Ahmet Ertegun, of course. And man, Ray, what can you say? Just one of the greatest artists of all time. And it shows off just right from the get-go on songs like Hallelujah, I Love Her So, which is just such a fun, upbeat track. I love it so much. You got Mess Around, which another just such a joyous song. And I can't help but always think of John Candy and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, like doing the whole thing and the saxophone solo. It's so hilarious. I Got a Woman, of course, which
Mm.
would also go on to be replicated by Kanye West into Gold Digger. You got Drown in My Own Tears. A Fool for You is such an amazing track. I mean, there's just so many great hits on this thing. I mean, it's not my personal favorite Ray Charles album, but I can see how it would be for many. And for him to come out of the gate with something this great shows you why people call him the genius. So, yeah, great pick.
Yeah, no, this is definitely Ray Charles' best record. I mean, this is like classic after classic on this thing. Yet again, a lot of songs you mentioned. Of course, This Little Girl of Mine is another great one as well.
Yeah.
Greenbacks is a great storytelling song about this gold digging woman. Funny enough, considering gold digger.
Yeah.
Um, just the whole second side, I just think is really really phenomenal overall. But yeah, Drown in My Own Tears is an iconic Ray Charles track that everybody knows. Fool for You, of course. And of course, my favorite, I probably would have to go I Got a Woman, despite its misogynistic lyrics, which don't hold up. But that song is so iconic. As soon as you hear him go, well, I
I
got a
got a
woman.
woman.
That
Where
with
to go
that
to town?
the
Yeah.
sax and everything, it's just like so iconic. And funny you mentioned Gold Digger because Jamie Foxx, of course, replicating the Ray Charles vocal, who won an Oscar for playing Ray Charles a year before that. So
Right.
pretty funny, and how that lines up. But yeah, this is just Ray Charles's absolute best. I think it has his best. Um, it has his best grouping of songs on here. All of his most iconic. I just think the production is kind of grainy and unpolished for the time. And yet again, I think some of the sentiments on this album are quite dated in regards to how he's relating to women. Other than that, if it weren't for those things, this would be way higher on my list. But it definitely made my list probably more so near the bottom. But even with that being said, I definitely understand why it is this high on the list. And yeah, I definitely think that if there was going to be a Ray Charles album that ended up highest on this list, I'm glad that is indeed this one.
Yeah.
So
And
great.
women relations, I gotta just say,
Yes.
I mean, yeah, obviously you gotta mention that. And like in the movie Ray Charles, if you've seen it,
Yeah.
he did some not so good things, but there are just some really sweet moments like in Hallelujah, I Love Her So. I always love that part where he says, in the morning when the sun come up, she give me coffee in my favorite cup.
Yeah.
It's just like it's so
That's
sweet,
nice.
man. I love it.
That's
So
nice.
yeah, and I can relate to that. So yeah,
Yeah.
great pick.
I'm glad you got that, man. That's what we should all strive for, right? But
Absolutely.
yeah, no, this is still just an iconic album, and I hope to own it sometime soon. So yeah, guys, that will now take us to number 19. The Shape of Jazz to Come by Ornette Coleman from 1959. This record produced by the other Erdogan brother, Nashui Erdogan. Also have to shout out Jerry Wexler for also producing Ray Charles, another legendary producer at Atlantic. But this album in particular, which is also from Atlantic, of course, features Ornette Coleman on alto saxophone, Don Cherry on cornet, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Billy Higgins on drums. This really was a turning point in jazz music, one that Miles Davis himself quite contested as actually being real music. I think that's a little harsh. And look, I'm not saying this is better than Miles' legendary album from that year or anything like that. But I think this is a very, very significant record in the formation of free jazz. And, what Coleman did here, I think is still nothing short of spectacular. This I definitely had higher up on the list. I think it was more like just around the midpoint I had it. So, like, I think this is a fairly good place to rate it. But I just think the way that these players just move independently of each other, but still complement them together all at the same time, is really kind of incredible, because this album is kind of all over the place and messy in some ways, and that's like my small issue, because sometimes I feel like it's atonal for the sake of it, but when it really is hitting, I think it really hits. Lonely Woman is the standard that came out of this album. Not my favorite track, actually. I don't quite love this track, but I understand why people would, and it is very good. There's not a weak track on this entire album, if you ask me. Just moments that aren't always, the absolute best. But eventually is just absolutely incredible, and I think the affectations Coleman makes with his sax on it sounds like a horse neighing, and I've never heard that on a jazz record before. And I think the way his solo segues seamlessly into Cherries is just absolutely incredible. It's just so manic in the
Hmm.
best way possible, and I think the thing that's very interesting about Coleman is he always from my understanding, he get a cheap saxophone just to use it once and just kind of make his mark and make him stand out from everyone else, and then just use something else the next time. He was very avant-garde in his own approach just to the instrument itself, which is really, really interesting. But of course, you have to mention other songs like On Peace. I love how Charlie Hayden, who actually is Jack Black's father, or his stepfather, which is an interesting little tidbit. Maybe most people don't know. But I just love the way he'll switch up the syncopation of his bass playing during Don Cherry's cornet solo. It really, really is, one of those moments where you can tell how in sync these players are, like I was saying. And then Congeniality swings the hardest on this entire record. I mean, that is just absolutely incredible. I think maybe in some ways the most accessible, but regardless, I love a good majority of this album. And yet again, for what it did for the genre, what it stands for, I understand why it's this high on the list, and I definitely think it's one of the best jazz albums of the 1950s.
Well, I can definitely see that, and I appreciate it for what it is. I think, especially listening to this album, I came to realize that um, I like my jazz to be a little more structured, I guess. But
Yeah,
because yeah, this, like you said, a little all over the place a lot of the time. But I definitely appreciate, especially what that pushed the boundaries for more avant-garde jazz in the future, like albums like Love Supreme may not have existed without something like this
sure.
before it,
Yeah.
or something that I love that came out just a couple years ago, Promises, the
Mm,
Pharoah Sanders album, which is very different in style, but
sure.
still like the avant-garde-ness of it all. So yeah, Ornette Coleman, definitely a pioneer and deserves. I wouldn't have had it this high. It actually didn't make my list, but I definitely get it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely influence wise too. I'm really glad it made this list this high, and another one I got to get sometime soon. But yeah, guys, that now is going to take us to number 18. Brilliant Corners by Thelonious Monk from 1957, the second Monk album to make this countdown. And yeah, I think that this, I would even put this higher. Look, I listened to this for the first time like a month ago or so. This is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. And it's one of my favorite jazz albums, period, by extension. And it's not even my favorite, which says a lot about, jazz from the 50s. And we'll get into that. But this album to me stands out in so many ways. And one of the reasons Monk is one of my favorite jazz musicians, I just think he was so creative in the way he played, the way he structured these songs, just from the opening title track, like the way he plays with time signatures was really something kind of groundbreaking for the time that no one was quite doing. Sure, maybe you could point to uh Time Out by, the Dave Brubeck quartet, but that was even a couple years later, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like even this was like something in and of itself wholly original and wholly unique. Just as a composer, he absolutely kills it. And of course, Balu Bolivar Balu's Air. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I just love the interplay on there between Sonny Rollins and Monk and Roach. I mean, Roach is absolutely killing it on like this is some of the best drumming I've ever heard in my life on this record, and I think this is probably the best I've ever heard Max Roach play, which is really saying a lot. But as I said, I think the interplay between them on that track is nothing short of incredible, really. And also I have to mention just the diversity on this album as well,
Hmm.
whether it be you could say on Panonica, where he's playing the Celeste, and yet again it gives a totally different flavor from all the other songs. Or you could just look at, I Surrender Dear, which is basically Monk doing his own, solo on piano, and it's just really really heartbreakingly beautiful. And then you really pick up things by the time you get to the last track, Bemsha Swing, which is probably my favorite on this record, not by much, but it's still just absolutely swings, like the title says. And I think Max Roach's use of timpani on this song might be the most innovative drumming I've ever heard on any jazz record. Like just straight up, it is absolutely incredible what
And
is
you got Paul
achieved.
Chambers on the double bass on that
Yeah,
track too.
yeah, there's so many different players just on all sorts of, different tracks on this album, like Clark Terry and Oscar Pettiford and Ernie Henry. The group he assembled for these sessions yet again was nothing short of miraculous within itself. Some of the most brilliant names in jazz, some that we've mentioned already in this countdown, Sonny Rollins, of course, second collaboration with them. I just think this is just such an innovative record in so many ways, and I think a really brilliant corner in jazz music, a cornerstone, if you will. I think this should make the top 10. But all things considered, I think I'll settle for number 18 on this list.
Yeah, well, it's kind of weird. Two jazz albums in a row that you love, and I think they're good, but like they're
No,
not
come on,
some
this
of my
one, man.
favorites. This one, no, no,
This
it
one's
it
great.
it's it is pretty great, but yeah, I wouldn't have had it this high. I do love Bemsha Swing for sure, and there's moments of it where definitely it kind of sucks you in, but it I don't know, it didn't suck me in enough to be like one of my favorite jazz albums of all time, if we're comparing in that way. But definitely deserves to be on this list, no doubt. And I think 18 is a pretty good spot for it, honestly. But yeah, I mean, just so many great players on this thing, and Thelonious himself, as you said, a very creative and innovative player on the piano. Nobody quite like him. So, yeah, glad to see him make the list twice.
Yeah, and I just want to say the only reason I don't think this record is like perfect is because during some of the songs, especially when it's like more him, laid back, you can kind of hear him humming and it's a little out of tune, and my perfect pitch just kind of drives me crazy. So that's the reason it's not a 10 out of 10 record, or else this would certainly be a perfect record in my estimation. But that's okay, because there's another couple of records from the 50s that might fall into that category. But regardless, as of now, let's move it on to number 17.
My story is much too sad to be told.
Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cole Porter Songbook from 1956. Oh man, I'm so glad this made the list, and in my opinion, this should be even higher. I mean, this
Yeah.
is an amazing album that over 30 songs, and throughout the entire record, it just keeps this momentum. I mean, first of all, the music of Cole Porter is amazing. I knew that going into this, which I was introduced to his music, well, really way before that, with songs like, I Get a Kick Out of You, without even knowing it. But then like films like Midnight in Paris come along, and you hear some of his songs, and you're like, oh man, yeah, I love that song. Like, Let's Do It, Let's Fall in Love. The birds do it, bees do it. It's such a cute song. And but Ella Fitzgerald, man, she is one of these people that could sing any songbook and make it come to life. But the marriage of these two in particular, because she had many albums in the 50s and beyond where she was singing the songbook of, Gershwin and what have you. But Cole Porter, I think this is the best, and I think many people would agree. I mean, from the opener of All Through the Night, you got Anything Goes, another great one that so many people know, even if you don't think you know it. You've heard many of these songs before. Night and Day is another great one. I mean, I could just go on and on about all the songs, but really what it comes down to is the delivery of Ella Fitzgerald, man. There's nobody like her. And I don't think there ever quite will be. She's just got this smooth, like butter voice that is also like, it's so hard to put into words how great she is, because she can do or sing anything. She has this dexterity that I think can sometimes go overlooked because of how smooth her voice is. But man, she's just incredible, and definitely deserves to be here. So very excited about it.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, if I'm being completely honest with you, Ella Fitzgerald is my favorite artist from this era of time.
I hear you.
And she's one of those artists that I just think has transcended time in a way. Probably, maybe even at least one of the oldest artists on this list, born at the tail end of the 1910s. And yet, I talk to people, it doesn't matter how old, how young, they're like, oh, she was just absolutely exceptional. And, I hear that from people younger than me, and that's saying a lot. Because I don't think any of these other musicians, for the most part, have transcended time. Maybe Miles Davis, maybe a few others, but I just think the universal appeal of Ella Fitzgerald is unlike anything else. I know Elvis certainly doesn't have that.
Yeah, she's totally timeless, man. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this album, when I heard it, like, this album has 32 songs. And there's only, like, one song on here I don't love. And even that's, like, very good. Which is really a testament to the fact that this is one of the greatest albums ever recorded. It is one of the most perfectly arranged and performed records, and it's in this sprawling 2-hour epic, just chronicling through the catalog of one of America's most prominent songwriters, really performed by the greatest artist in vocal jazz music, and certainly one of the greatest vocalists of all time. Like, as you said, like, Ella Fitzgerald just had a perfect voice, perfect control, perfect intonation. Not a single note is missed by her or by any of the arrangements. They don't do her a disservice at all. And yet again, like you said, All Through the Night, Anything Goes, which I was actually in Anything Goes, so a lot of these songs are quite familiar to me, like I Get a Kick Out of You, which I think her version on here is just absolutely sublime. One of my favorites on this album, one of my favorite versions of that song in general. The Lovely is another one from Anything Goes that I also love. I have to mention the beautifully heartbreaking Miss Otis Regrets. I think that is like lyrically the best song on this album. And yet again, I think a lot of times listening to these old records with all these Cole Porter songs, like all these old songwriters, sometimes it's hard to articulate the brilliance that is there, or at least it's not fully elaborated on, but here I fully got like why Cole Porter was such a brilliant songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, especially in that song, it just brings out so many layers. And yet again, I mean, I could go on and on about this record. One of my favorites, It's Alright With Me. Just an absolute bombastic number that's just swinging heavy from start to finish. And a great tale about, you might not be the right one, though your lips look lovely, they're the wrong lips. But
Right.
yet again, if you're available, it's quite all right with me. Definitely a very relatable song in some ways. But yet again, Love for Sale's another absolute classic on here. I could go on and on about just how great this is. I Got You Under My Skin, Don't Fence Me In. I mean, yeah. What can you say about this record that isn't positive at all? I just think maybe this is, yet again, maybe this is an Amazon Music issue. But some of like, there's one song where the production wasn't quite on the same level, where it was just a little scratchy. But other than that, this is almost a flawless record in every single sense of the word. I believe this actually was in my top 5 on this list, and I think it should be at least in the top 10 overall. But,
Yeah, I was in my top
maybe,
10 too. Yeah.
yeah, man, maybe it's just more people need to sit down and listen to this, 2-hour record. But I assure you, like, I was a bit trepidatious about how much I love it going in, and the fact that I love it this much should say a lot to the quality of this astounding achievement, and maybe the greatest record Ella Fitzgerald ever recorded in her illustrious career. So amazing choice, guys, and that is going to take us now to number 16.
Bo Diddley from 1958, the self-titled, from Mr. Bo Diddley himself. And yeah, this is a great spot on the list, guys. Great pick. I love this guy's music, and I think he was so influential to a lot of rock and rollers, especially just the rhythm of not just his guitar playing, but the drumming and the interesting style of it. Inspired many in his time and beyond. Rolling Stones were huge fans of this guy. Just right off the bat, you know what you're in for with that. Dun, 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 dun. So great on that track, as well as Who Do You Love? I mean, just so many hits on here. I'm a Man, which is like an amazing kind of blues rocker, almost like a different version of Hoochie Coochie Man in that vein. But then you got like these other just sort of weird songs like Bring It to Jerome, which I just love, which like Jerome Green kind of takes over vocals with that Bring It to Jerome, bring it on home, bring it to Jerome. It's so hilarious, man. And but also so cool and has great grooves to it. Before You Accuse Me is another great bluesy tune. So it's just, yeah, man. You either kind of, I don't think you love or hate this guy, but some people don't appreciate him as much as I do, maybe. But I think Bo Diddley is just amazing. Like, and some of the great, as I mentioned, Rolling Stones, other great British invasion bands like the Animals, they did their own version of the title track and some other things like that. So a lot of people paying their respects just a few years after he was a big thing. And I think that kind of like, Big Joe Turner and some other people we've talked about on this list. Um, the weight of what he brought onto the scene is still felt to this day. So, yeah, great spot for Mr. Bo Diddley.
No, I agree with what you said about the weight of what he did, because I certainly think that, just the creation of the Bo Diddley beat itself is so iconic to this day. I think his work as a guitarist is very singular, very exceptional. Um, when it comes to placement on this list, it certainly should be nowhere near Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook. Look, I think just influence alone, I can understand why this album made the list, but I certainly think this is the worst episode of this episode. Or, that didn't make sense. This is the worst album of this episode. And a lot of that...
Come on.
No, but hear me out. Like, all these songs, of course you got Bo Diddley, I'm a Man. You got some highlights here and there, but they all sound almost exactly the same. And they're very rudimentary in a way that I feel like a lot of his other contemporaries, were probably a bit more fleshed out.
Wait, are you saying that Hey Bo Diddley sounds like Bo Diddley? How dare you?
But I mean, come on, man. I mean, I can only, I will listen to this again maybe at some point, but like when I heard it, I was like, yeah, I guess it's influential, but I just kind of get sick of him referring to himself in the first person because it just seems a bit pompous, and I'm just like, all right, come on, we get your Bo Diddley. There's two, as you said, there's two songs. There's like 4 songs that are like saying that he's Bo Diddley, and I'm like, all right, we get the fucking point. Like, let's move on with it, shall we? Yet again, this is a good record. I give it more points for influence than it actually being one that I even love. I think perhaps just for influence alone it should be on the list, but I certainly don't think it deserves to be in the top 20.
He influenced Diddy because there's Diddy Wah Diddy and Diddley
No.
Daddy.
Just stop. No.
I have to say it, man. But
now,
great pick, guys, nonetheless.
Now it has been said. So in that case, we will move it right on to number 15.
Johnny Cash with his Hot and Blue Guitar, the debut album from Mr. Johnny Cash, the Man in Black himself, from 1957. And great to see him on the list here. I mean, a great debut. You got Folsom Prison Blues. I mean, come on. I hear that train coming.
It's rolling around the bend.
And I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when.
I don't know when.
We could do the whole damn thing.
Oh, yeah.
But I Walk the Line, of course, which went on to be, obviously the title of his biopic, which is a pretty decent music biopic, I got to say. But there's a lot of great stuff on here. Cry, Cry, Cry is another really good one. Kind of like what you said about Bo Diddley. It can get a little repetitive here and there, some of these songs, but that's to be expected for the genre, I guess. But I'm glad that he made the list. I do think it's a little high on the list. For my liking, it did make my list, but it was much lower. But yeah, Johnny Cash, man, just an absolute icon. So would be surprised if this was not on there. So
yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that because I do love this album and it didn't make my list. It was one of the few that had to get left off. Part of the reason why, what you said, I just think, it is a little, too stripped down. It's just acoustic guitar and bass for the most part, and it works for what it is, especially on songs like I Walk the Line. And I just think, yet again, Johnny Cash had one of those voices where it wasn't a technically amazing voice like someone like Ella Fitzgerald, but there's I heard that he went to take vocal lessons and the teacher heard his voice and says, you have something that I don't even want to change, and you need to go on with that, which I think is a pretty amazing story considering how iconic his voice is. And yet again, just his bass range is just unbelievable, especially on I Walk the Line. I don't know
yeah.
many people can hit those notes. But yet again, one of his absolute best songs, testament to his first wife. Brilliant, brilliant track. Of course, Folsom Prison Blues is probably my favorite song on here. Yet again, that and how that transcended into his career, especially going to Folsom Prison itself, and just his whole tour with prison reform and his activism there.
Right.
But I really do love a lot of these songs, like Cry, Cry, Cry. So Doggone Lonesome, I remember being pretty great. And I was really surprised how much of a Christian album a lot of this is. Like, there's a lot of, like, gospel songs on here and, like, odes to God and, like,
And he stayed
if
true
the
to
good
that
Lord's
throughout
will.
his career as well. So yeah.
Well, and I mean, he definitely had a belief in God. He said, and I respect Johnny Cash for this, said he was the biggest hypocrite of them all, which is true. But, the fact that he admitted it, I think, definitely I can respect where he's coming from. But yeah, I think that it's a really interesting starting point, and I think I technically set the baseline for what Johnny Cash would do afterwards. I think it's one of his best studio albums. But yet again, didn't quite make my list just because there's so many great albums from the 50s I had to leave off. But not surprised that it made it. Should it be a little bit lower? Yeah, probably. But I still think this is a great record. And I understand perhaps maybe why it was this high on the list. So yeah, guys, another great choice in this episode, and that is going to take us to number 14. Sarah Vaughan from 1955, the self-titled record by Sarah Vaughan. Yeah, this is, I think, one of the greatest albums of all time, up there with a lot of the ones that we have mentioned today. And I think probably deserves to be in the top 10. It was in my top 10. And look, as much as I probably love Ella Fitzgerald more as an artist, I know I just made my video of the top 10 female artists back on International Women's Day. Well, unfortunately...
Great video. If you guys haven't checked it out, by the way, check it out.
No, thank you, man. I appreciate that, and I hate to inform you that video is somewhat aged like milk, because I listened to this album after the fact, and I'm like, well, Sarah Vaughan has to be on that list, and as much as I definitely would still put Ella at the top, I think Sarah Vaughan's a better singer. I think Sarah Vaughan's probably, for me, one of the top 10 greatest vocalists of all time. The expressive phrasing on here is just beyond exceptional. This is some of the greatest singing you'll ever hear. It's like she's almost like a mix between the greatest sensibilities of Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday, kind of combined into one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yet she's so distinct, and especially coming right into the beginning of this record with Lullaby of Birdland, which is definitely one of her most iconic songs. And yet again, the scat singing on here is really unbelievable. The depth and grit she gives to some of these notes while not even missing a single second. And the interplay between Clifford Brown and the band, who's just absolutely amazing on this. His trumpet playing is just absolutely otherworldly.
Dude, like, he's up there with Miles, in my opinion, as like just one of the great, like, yeah, some of the greatest trumpet playing you'll hear on any album ever on this record is Clifford Brown, man. So good.
I agree with that 100%, man, and that's the thing that's so great about it. Yet again, this really is a true cross between a vocal album and a jazz album. Mm-hmm. There isn't really much room for either one to exist on their own laurels as either. And of course, you got all the different instrumental segments on this, and also shout out to Roy Haynes on the drums, who's still going strong at 99 years old.
Oh, wow.
Still playing. Yeah, dude, that guy is so well maintained, and just had to shout him out. The fact that he's still around with us is pretty amazing. But yet again, like, all these interpretations of these classic songs like April in Paris is unbelievably beautiful. You're Not the Kind is another one that absolutely stands out. Embraceable You is an amazing, amazing version of this song. But to me, my favorite song on here is I'm Glad There Is You.
Mm.
Oh my goodness, just
Yeah.
blows my mind from a vocal standpoint, from the way the melody moves, the way Clifford Brown comes in with an amazing, amazing trumpet solo. And yet again, finishing off with September Song, and it's crazy. It, ends on a very strong note with a lot of energy. Yet again, these arrangements are just beyond beautiful. The only thing is, I'm not necessarily like in love with He's My Guy or Jim, but even then, there's still really great songs, and I forgot which one. But yet again, there's another solo that just absolutely comes in and makes the song that much better.
Yeah, I was gonna
Um,
say I love those songs too. He's My Guy and Jim. I mean, there's really nothing weak on here,
no,
honestly,
no.
in my opinion. But yeah, it's great through and through. Um, yeah, you said it perfectly, man. Like I thought the same thing, like that she is a mixture, like a culmination of all the best female vocalists of the 50s in one. And definitely you do hear that kind of ache of Billie Holiday in her voice as well, which works so
Hmm.
well um, with all these songs. So, yeah, great marriage between her and Clifford Brown on this thing. It's really, in my mind, a great jazz album, and
Hmm.
yeah,
Sure.
it was in my top 20. So, absolutely, I can see why it would be this high, no doubt.
Sure, and really, as I said, I think the greatest jazz vocalist, if we're talking about from a pure vocal standpoint, I mean,
Yeah.
Sarah Vaughan was just unbelievable, and even though I think this album should be a few spots higher, I'm absolutely delighted to see it make the list this high, nonetheless. So yeah, guys, that now is going to take us to number 13.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time.
Elvis's Golden Records from 1958, of course, by the one and only Elvis Presley. This is widely considered to be not the first compilation album, because I believe that was Johnny Mathis's greatest hits, but this is definitely the first greatest hits album in rock and roll history, which is quite significant, and I think one of the absolute best, because I think this album is my favorite Elvis Presley album that I've heard just in general. I think it compiles the best of what made Elvis great and what made him broke out onto the scene, like Hound Dog. Just what a perfect opening track. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. You exactly know what you're getting into as soon as you hear as soon as you hear Elvis's ever so iconic voice come in on this track here. Of course, I just think this whole first half is quite incredible. All Shook Up, Heartbreak Hotel, I think
Hmm.
is one of the most influential songs on many rock singers from the era. Of course, when it comes to, well, since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. I think just his vocal affectations on the song are just so, is Robert Plant's as Robert Plant once said, very animalistic. When he's like articulating Heartbreak Hotel will hold me, and like that little thing he does. It's just, that's why I think, whether you could make that argument that he appropriated black music, I definitely think the delivery in which he performed, really, you can't deny how amazingly talented this dude was. And there's certainly, I don't think that should take away from his appeal at all. Jailhouse Rock, which might be my favorite on here. I mean, who doesn't know that song? You know what I mean? Too
Yeah,
Much,
it's
another great
great.
one. Don't Be Cruel. In the second half. Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear is so much fun. I don't want to play with tigers. The tigers play too rough. An iconic Elvis track. And of course, Love Me Tender, one of his absolute best ballads, taking orally and reappropriating it once again with Elvis. But adding his own set of lyrics. He actually got a songwriting credit on this one, and I think it's one of his best songs. I mean, what else can I really say? I think my only thing is some of these songs sound a little bit too similar, and just some of them don't stand out like the absolute best tracks on this album and in Elvis's discography. But this really does contain the best of Elvis's discography, especially from this period, and I think really defines what made Elvis Presley great in the 50s. And I would have had it probably just a couple spots lower, but I honestly think that this is a great placement for it on the list overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great compilation. Yeah, I think this was definitely in the upper half of my list, and I can see why. I guess technically this probably is also my favorite Elvis album for that reason.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's a great entry point for anyone who's new to
For sure.
Elvis. There's more to explore in later years as well, in his career. But yeah, I mean, he's um not my favorite artist on this list, and for some of those reasons you mentioned there. But I think there's no denying, especially in this time, he was kind of the king of rock, and a lot of that he did bring to the table, just in the way he performed, his voice. Nobody sounded like him, nobody moved like him exactly, and yeah, man, women swooned. So yeah, what can you say, man? You mentioned all the great songs, so yeah, great pick, guys.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Elvis has certainly gone down in my estimation as opposed to some of the other artists that I might love on this list, especially, Belafonte, Miles Davis, Ella Fitzgerald. But, he's still near the top for me. I absolutely love Elvis's music to this day. I don't care what anyone says.
Hey, he
I still
influenced the
think he was.
Beatles, man, so that's
I
good
mean,
enough for me.
he might be the most well-known person, well, definitely the most well-known person on this list, but one of the most well-known people in the history of the human race. So I don't think that can be discredited, and I think these songs obviously put him to that level. So yet again, great pick, and that is going to take us now to number 12.
Berry is on top by Chuck Berry from 1959. Another huge influence on so many other artists, just like Elvis, like we talked about. His guitar stylings, especially influenced the likes of Keith Richards and, of course, the Beatles and so many others. But yeah, I mean, just for Johnny Be Good alone, you knew this was going to be on the list somewhere. Then you've got Maybelline, another great catchy tune. Maybelline, so great.
Why can't it be true? Yeah,
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
man, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, so many of these songs are just so fun, kind of a little bit of that Little Richard style, but with his own thing going on, especially guitar wise. Carol's another great one. Roll Over Beethoven, which of course the Beatles would do their own version of that down the road. Little Queenie, Around and Around. This almost plays a little bit like a greatest hits for Chuck Berry. Although there are a couple songs missing that I think are good. But the thing is, a lot of his stuff ends up sounding a little samey. And for that reason, I wouldn't have had it quite this high. But definitely a legend of the 50s, so had to have him on the list.
Yes, absolutely one of the most influential figures from the 50s. Also, maybe one of the worst. But, that's a whole other thing. If you know about Chuck Berry, you know what's up. But what I will say, I mean, this is an album to me that isn't undeniably great, but I don't quite love it. So it didn't make my list for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. Especially, look, first I have to mention the songs on here that are great, especially Almost Grown, which is so iconic, especially, used to great effect in American Graffiti. Sets you right in that time period.
Yeah.
Maybelline, of course, is one of his absolute best songs. You could say the same thing about Johnny Be Good, which is one of the greatest songs of all time, probably, especially of this era. Little Queenie, like you said, Roll Over Beethoven, All great stuff. I mean, there's so many great songs on this album, but my biggest issue is like he starts off almost every single song with the same exact riff, and
Yes,
after a while,
yes.
I'm just like, okay, like we know that this is like your signature thing, but like, can you do anything else? And that's the only reason I don't love this album because I just think it gets too samey. But yet again, unlike the Bo Diddley record, I feel like I love a lot more of these songs, and I just think
Mhm.
Chuck Berry, as a songwriter, certainly was probably the most definitive when you look at the template of rock and roll and how many other people copied, especially the Beach Boys. You know, I mean, I know the song isn't on this, but you know, basically reappropriating Sweet 16 and turning it into to Surfing USA. I think it says a lot to his influence alone. And yet again, didn't have this album on my list, but I would have been shocked if it didn't make it. I think it should be a little bit lower, but you know, it's Chuck Berry, man, so it makes sense.
And just, I mean, Michael J. Fox jamming in Back to the Future, man, that says it all. And yeah, the influence keeps going.
It all started with Marty and Chuck's cousin Marvin. So there you go, guys. But anyway, that was another great choice on this countdown, and that will take us to number 11. Little Girl Blue, the debut album by Nina Simone from 1959. Yet again, another absolute great record from this era, and certainly I think one of the greatest debut albums of all time. I remember the first time I heard this for a good long while. I thought this could have been a 10 out of 10 record. Didn't not quite end up being that way, but just from the opening of Mood Indigo being my introduction to Nina Simone, I was not prepared for just what a tremendous and transformative and expressive vocalist that she was. I definitely think I would probably even I'd rank her right around Sarah Vaughan is like one of the top 10 vocalists of all time because I don't think anyone had a voice quite as expressive or one that pierced your soul in the way that Nina Simone did, especially in songs like "Don't Smoke in Bed." Like you've heard these standards done by a lot of these other guys like Sinatra, but never like this. Now I think singers like Sarah Vaughan and Nina Simone and Ella Fitzgerald who really draw the emotion out of these songs in a way I don't think a lot of other artists did at the time with their contemporaries. But yet again, like, you got to give credit to "He Needs Me" is another absolutely painstakingly blew out. I think this really has some of the best lyrics present on any album in the 50s. It really cuts deep to the correlation of the human experience in a way that really does feel very impactful to this day. And "Little Girl Blue," the title track, the way it's they interpolate "Good King Wenceslas" and turn it into something even more beautiful and majestic. I think it's definitely my favorite song on here. Yet again, "Plain Gold Ring" is another one. Talk about an extramarital affair. It's just unbelievable the stuff that was being talked about on this album. Of course, her version of "I Loves You Porgy's" really beautiful as well. The instrumentals too. I mean, Nina Simone on piano. She's no sloucher there either, and I think they really stand out in some way. Yet again, it falls in that same vein of jazz, and yet again, the vocals here is such a great harmony with the instrumentals, and it comes together in such a beautiful way. I think this is a great introduction for such a legendary artist, and though I'd probably have it in the top 20, so I do think it does deserve to be on this episode overall, since I had it at let's see, actually I had a number 22, but close enough. It's 11 spots higher. I completely understand it. Really glad to see it above Barry on top at the very least, and yeah, really great choice.
Yeah, a great pick. I wouldn't have had it quite this high. I think I had it towards the bottom of my list, only because, like, I don't know, she's a little bit kind of like we said with Billie Holiday, a bit of an acquired taste vocally. And but she's right up there with all of them, with Ella and Sarah Vaughan. And she also, like Sarah Vaughan, like we said, is a mixture of all of those great voices, Nina Simone included. But she's definitely got her own thing going on. Like
Hmm.
no one quite sounds like her, and I think that works really well most of the time. But for some of it, for me, just gets a little too dreary, I guess. But overall, I mean, she's another amazing artist that definitely deserves to be this high on the list. And it's kind of cool that she ended up as high as she did, not quite cracking the top 10, but yeah, definitely an amazing album. And yeah, all the tracks you mentioned are great. It's one that I kind of have to be in the mood for. So I
Hmm.
didn't have it quite that high on my list. But yeah, you guys have done an amazing job picking these albums. I mean, and we still got 10 more to go, but man, this has been one heck of an episode, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I guess I'll say before we go off, I just think, yeah, she had a very deep, penetrating voice.
Yeah.
Maybe the best alto voice out there. So to end this episode off on that, I think is pretty cool. And yeah, I can't wait to talk about the top 10. I'm not going to say that I fully love all the albums on the top 10, but I think overall it's kind of it would be kind of hard not to see why they made the list. And there's so many that I want to talk about. Some of my favorites of all time, certainly, that we have not gotten to,
Yeah.
and I can't wait for that to happen. Of course, that episode is going to be on Johnny Radio, so please subscribe if you haven't at this point. I'm sure you have, but just on the off chance you haven't, please make sure to turn your head that way, and you'll be seeing that video next week. We're going to have some special guests on the channel as well to split up the top 10 episodes, if you will, and it's going to be a great time discussing these records nonetheless. Always has been, always will be. And yeah, guys, thank you again for tuning in to this episode in this series, and we'll talk to you next week.
Peace.
You should have heard this knocked out jailbird sing, let it rock. Everybody let it rock.